Alright, Pokey26 here with the second version of the new PTR patch on Warcraft 3, PTR 2, whatever you want to call it, 1.36.1. And there are some more changes as well as some modified changes. And I've only briefly looked over them, so I'm kind of going into it on the fly. That being said, we see some misspellings already. Can I invite players? Tooltips. Reduce cost didn't apply before, so they're fixing PTR bugs as well. And then here we got the added and modified balance changes. But I think we'll just refer to this later if needed, and we'll look at the overall picture down below. And we'll talk about this though. We'll talk about the reverted ones because these are ones that are just removed. So basically, they removed all the movement speed nerfs, which I think is fine. I wouldn't have hated if they at least left the Naga Sea Witch and Lich at lower move speeds. But yeah, they removed them all, which I think is particularly fine for the melee strength heroes, which made the bulk of them. But like I said, Lich and Naga could have still, it would have been fine on there. Force them to get boots or have less move speed, whatever. And then Rusty Mining Pick. Looks like there was enough backlash that it is now currently removed. I don't know if they will try to put it in still in the future, but I do think completely removing it is the right choice. So yeah, now we're on the master changelog, which should have all the changes together again. I'm not sure if there is any bug fixes worth mentioning that are new. I think these are all the same as before. So we'll get back down to the balance. So human. They previously were boosting this from 40 to 42.5, which I think was good. And now they're putting it to 45, which I think... I think it could be fine. But I honestly think 42.5 was enough. Especially if they're going to be giving multiple hero buffs and food buffs with their mains, including food buffs for tech. So I don't know. It might still be fine. It's probably whatever, but I do think 42.5 was plenty and would have still been a good buff to militia. Especially considering all the health buffs they've already had and so on. So, yeah. But let's go down to Bash. This one is huge. So before it was 25 to 25, 50, 75. Now they have changed it to 100 on max level and completely reworked the chance to 25 on all levels instead of 20, 30, 40. And the duration from 2 on all levels to 2, 4, 6 with 1, 2, 3 on heroes, which is just a crazy change. Because now, I did a little bit of math on this previously. See if I can recall it exactly. But basically, against units, you were getting a lot of extra stun duration. You were just like bashing units out of existence, basically, on top of having the damage. But we're just focusing on the chance and the duration right now. And yeah, if you actually had a max bash, it's crazy how much extra duration you'd have. If you do 20 bashes on max level bash, previously you would stun units for was this like 16 seconds, and now it's like 30 seconds. So almost double the stun duration for units on max level. But for heroes, you're actually getting less overall stun duration and less And because it's on less bash chance, you're having less consistent bashes, which is horrible design. Because now it is heavily RNG, like more RNG is put into it. And while it is less overall, because if you do 20 attacks, for instance, right, then you're getting 5 bashes here on those 20 attacks, and you were getting 8 previously. Well, I mean, 8 bashes at 2 seconds is 16 seconds of stun. 5 bashes at 3 seconds is 15 seconds of stun. You're actually stunning 1 less second on heroes for, or on average in 20 hits or whatever. But the thing here that's more important, like, it's actually still a buff because that stun duration is longer when it does proc. So you're having like higher RNG hits, and when they do occur, they're having a bigger impact, which can just cause you to lose a hero. It's a very bad design and unneeded. Now, their previous change, 25 to 25, 50, 75, that was fine. No one cares. It's whatever. The bash damage doesn't really matter, especially with how rare you even have these higher level bashes, let alone get them to proc and so on. It's whatever. But now they're like buffing a little more. They're upping the duration of the stuns. Level 1 bash is also just stronger in general, except against heroes, I guess. But you're having it more often. So it's really weird to judge against, like, a level 2 bash against heroes. I guess it's technically even worse in terms of number of procs, but you're getting more damage. I don't know, it's so weird. It's just unneeded. I think it was fine for them to do 1 change as well, but when they're doing 3 different changes on bash, it's like they're trying to take a Dota approach, or, you know, any sort of MOBA approach, right? Where you just completely are essentially reworking an entire skill rather than changing it. This isn't simply a buff or a nerf, it's a complete rework. Because the durations are changed, the chances are changed, the damage is changed. It's just so much different. And I personally think it is not only bad design, but potentially too strong like this. That being said, I do still wonder, like, do you even choose bash on level 5 anyways compared to bolt or clap? I don't know. I don't know about that, which is like, it still might not even be used over like bolt or clap on 5, I would think, unless you're like really good with gloves of haste and circlets on your MK and just have high attack speed. I don't know. It's weird. But yeah, I would say I don't like it. I don't think all of these changes should go through. It's fine to have something, but it shouldn't be all of them. Not only that, but this is kind of crazy when it does happen against units, right? 6-second stun on a unit is crazy. It's like an ensnare, except the unit's actually just stunned. It can't even attack back or anything like a cannon, and when it's ensnared, right? Just okay. Yeah, I think they're just trying to make it used, but it's not like bash wasn't used. It just fell behind bolt and clap because bolt and clap are good. And now they're like, let's just make all of the Mountain King skills good. Why not? Moving on to devotion. So they did tone this down a bit, which is good. But they didn't tone down the level 1 devotion, which I think is still bad. Not only does it just look weird, now because it's like 3 on level 1 and 4 on level 2, you would actually consider not even going level 2 in some situations and instead get Divine Shield because of how much utility that gives you in survivability. If you had like a level 4 paladin, right? And the level 1 is just super good. You're close to what level 2 devotion used to be. Yeah. I didn't hate if they wanted to do like 2-4-6, but if they're gonna do 3-4-6, I think it's still bad. I mean, I personally don't think devotion even needed to be buffed, but if they were going to buff it, it should have been like 2-4-6. But 3-4-6, it's just they're trying. Like the only thing I can think of is that they're trying to give human different first heroes. They want you to go paladin first, Holy Light Devotion rifles, or Mountain King first, and start bashing stuff with like Bolt Bash and no aura. They're trying to give human a way to do something without relying on Archmage's aura, but what they're also doing is making it so if you do still go Archmage, you now just have stronger Paladin and MK, which was already very strong second and third heroes to begin with. So I don't know. I think it's bad, but we'll see what happens. Like I said, I still think this should be 2-4-6 if they are going to change it, if they are going to buff it to begin with. And then we got an interesting change here with food supply. So they did a little bit of food supply changing with Orc in a patch quite a while back, like a year ago or something, where they had the town hall upped from 10 to 11. And now they are having keep for human, which is tier 2, I believe, right? So when you tech, you get an extra 2 food. Then when you tech to castle, you get an extra 2 food. And I think this is actually fine because it doesn't affect Town Hall, which is the lowest form, I believe. I think it's fine because this means at keep, your food, instead of being at 48, you'll be at 50 food, which means you can be at that upkeep mark exactly without having to invest in that extra farm. That brings you to 54. You can now not make that farm and be at 50. And then castle, same sort of concept. Before, I believe you were at 96 out of 100. So you'd have to go to 102 out of 100, which you can only use 100 of it anyways. But now, because of this +2 and this +2, it actually works out to 100. And that makes sense, right? Generally, if you get to 100 food with human, you're probably like castle. So it kind of works out nicely numbers wise, I guess. And I don't hate this change. I think that's fine. Yo. The night elf changes I did also look over briefly, and I think they are like some of them are fine. However, I think Night Elf kind of gets screwed over the most in this current proposed patch. So I already discussed this previously in the previous video I made, but I think the talon change is bad. It's unneeded. Talons are already not used a lot, and I don't know. I mean, they are used, but they're not like to the point where they need to be nerfed, and if they are going to be nerfed, does it really need 10 gold? The immolation change though. Didn't I see somewhere that said 5 at first furnace somewhere? Or am I thinking of it? Immolation activation cost increased from 5 to 10. All right, yeah. Previously they had it at 5, which I think was good. I think it's fine to put a cost to 5. 10 cost is actually starting to push it now, especially when they are also lowering the damage. Looking at this, I think there will be a lot less immolation used because currently elves are already using all of their moon wells to be able to run immolation. So if that's the case, they either need to do less speed creeping with it, more harassing, or more pulling of creeps and not even using immolation and just creeping like normal in the past. So I think there will be instances where immolation's still used, but I do think it's actually getting to the point already, just with this, where you might see immolation just fall out of favor. It might just not be used at all in a lot of situations, or there might be other heroes used. That being said, I think its best use in this state is less for creeping now and more for harassing, or like you need to get big damage done with this. Otherwise, it's better to just go mana burn to begin with. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I think this being at 5 and this, they could still do this. But I think the activation cost should be at 5. At least to start. They should try it out at 5 more and see if it works better. Warden. The Warden changes are interesting. I think their previous proposed change was too much damage. But now the change is they're buffing blink, which is okay. If they are going to buff blink, they have, I would say, less inclination to buff other stuff, and that's kind of what they're doing, right? So now Fan of Knives will still do the same damage per target at all levels that it used to do. It'll just hit more targets. But this really only helps if you're doing like an all-in against militia plus footmen, or if you're facing Gargs late game. Maybe against rifle, mortar, caster humans as well. The extra targets would also matter. But otherwise, like against workers, this doesn't do anything really. You hit 2 extra targets, but usually you don't have those targets in range. Many times, Warden Fan of Knives in your base are only hitting 4, maybe 5 workers to begin with. Like if there's one in the mine, if it's human or I guess orc technically, you're only hitting like 4 workers unless a woodworker also is nearby, right? So these extra targets don't actually matter harassing. It's just in the actual fights it matters, which I'm not sure if that's what Warden players even want. I feel like Warden players want to be able to do more harass damage, and they don't actually care about how good Warden is in the fights because they're already relying on just getting level 6 Avatar of Vengeance and just having this highly leveled hero and then a secondary hero potentially with Panda or whatever. So I don't think this is the sort of change Warden players want. But I do think it's better to have this than their previous proposal. It's still a buff to Warden, but it's not. I don't even know if this really makes Warden used much more, is the thing. So maybe some other change would have still been better. Like for instance, their previous damage change, which had a lot more damage per target, it still had like these targets, but a lot more damage. They could have maybe done something like that if they weren't buffing Blink as well. But if they're going to buff Blink as well, I think this is a more reasonable change. I just don't think it even makes... I don't think it makes people even that inclined to play Warden, so I don't know if it's actually good to do this anyways. If that makes sense. Yeah. Because these extra targets don't matter for what you want for Warden. You want You want to get in and do a lot of economic damage so that you get high level, and extra targets don't matter for that because you're not having all of their workers piled up into one spot for it to matter generally. Druid of the Claw starting mana increased from 100 to 110. This one is new, I believe, and I think it's fine, especially considering Elf is getting nerfed like everywhere else. Mana Flare range reduced. I think if they are going to nerf Mana Flare, this is probably one of the better ways to do it. Elf is already typically going multiple fairies anyways, so now it's on the elf to micro them properly, place them in the right position so that they have the right coverage, rather than having like 3 fairies fly in and then they all mana flare at the same time, roughly same area. Now the elf has to purposely plant them one at a time. Plant one, move the other one a bit forward, plant that, move the other one a bit forward, plant that, and have them all flared in appropriate spots. And I think that's good. It requires the elf to micro a bit more, make sure they get the proper positions, and doesn't just like cover the whole screen. This is good because it still leaves Mana Flare strong when it does hit. You just have to be more mindful of where you're starting your Mana Flares. This is fine if they're going to nerf it that way. But the other nerfs I actually don't really like for Elf anymore. Because like I said, I think the immolation a little too far. I think this at 5 would have been fine. Druid of the Talon, I don't think it was needed at all. But whatever. Moving on to Undead. Spiked Carapace melee damage return. I previously said I don't think this matters too much. I still agree with that. I don't think it matters too much. But the bonus armor does still need to be toned down, and they still did not tone it down. This is a lot. You will see potentially some sort of like solo hero Crypt Lord stuff, I think. And they just try to have him up front tanking while whatever is in the back. Necros, I guess. Maybe you have Unholy Frenzy Crypt Lord just whacking away. And you don't even want to focus the Crypt Lord because he's super tanky with all of this. But you are still sacrificing Impale. Maybe you're sacrificing going other heroes. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. I feel like these sort of changes were made just to have people try to play a different skill on the hero. But honestly, Spiked Carapace wasn't even necessarily bad as it was. It was just Impale and Beetles were really good, right? But personally, I think this is fine. It's like whatever. But this doesn't need to be changed. Like, you don't really need the extra armor on Crypt Lord. He's already getting quite a bit of armor, in my opinion. Not to mention how populous. I don't know. What's the right? I don't think that's the right word I wanted. How common ring drops are for armor rings. Like this isn't even needed, and just kind of is overkill. So I don't really like this. I think this should be removed. But sure, if you want to buff that way for Carapace, fine. It mostly affects Orc or something that right clicks a lot, I guess. Maybe. I still would have liked Raise Dead to be reverted, which they did not do. But I did previously mention, I think these could go through and it's kind of whatever. But the fact that they're reducing the cost for Raise Dead, I think is way too much. This is the same as before. I said it was good. The Abomination collision size is an interesting one. So I think this is meant to be a buff for A-bombs. But I feel like it's actually a nerf. Because you actually want A-bombs to block stuff. That's kind of their purpose, right? You want them to block off your opponent from getting to your backline while your Lich just kills everything, right? So isn't having less collision size and letting your opponent's units get past them actually a nerf, technically, in most cases? I don't know, it's really weird. That being said, it does allow you to have more A-bombs in a line, but it's I don't know. I think in some, like I said, some situations it's definitely a nerf. Some situations it could be a buff if you have the exact right amount of A bombs where you can fit one more A bomb in your line or something. Maybe it's a buff, whatever. Turn rate, I believe this makes them turn faster, in which case they're buffs, which is whatever. It's fine, I guess. I think this is buffs, right? And it makes undead better at kiting, which they were already good at with Unholy Aura and what they did a lot. So I don't know. I don't necessarily hate these changes, but they're just kind of weird. They came out of nowhere essentially. And now Orc. Orc is a bit overtuned now, I think, because they're getting buffs everywhere. Buff, 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 buff. Like their whole race is getting buffs, and Orc is already strong. The only thing that makes Orc weak is that they're much more prone to getting caught out somewhere and just losing the game with either their Blade Master dying or losing raiders at times they weren't supposed to, and their units, you know, they need their units to stay alive. Right? They can't afford to just accidentally lose their raider somewhere or whatever. Like if they accidentally get it picked off by an entangle focus or things like that, or a coil nova. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about this when it's all buffs. I think this is too much. Is too much. That being said, looking at them individually, I think this is good. The Headhunter buff's good. Blade Storm damage, I previously said I think if they are going to buff it, it should be only 130. They did at least revert it from 160 down to 140, but I think 130 would probably still be better. Mostly because you don't want to face solo blade, hit and run, towers everywhere, expansions everywhere, and the blade gets level 6 and just starts blade storming your buildings, right? So you want to have this toned down a little bit. Either that, or make it so it doesn't affect buildings to begin with, and then the higher damage could be fine. You just use it against units, and that's fine. In battle, it's fine. But when it's high damage and gets buildings, it's pretty annoying to have like a solo blade high level killing buildings alongside raiders or bats or wyverns or whatever they do with their fortified and spiked burrows and so on. All the walker changes, I previously said this could potentially be good. I do wonder if maybe this is unneeded and they could just have the training be faster, because it's still considerable. It's 15 seconds here, 30 seconds total. It's considerable. They don't necessarily need this one, or maybe it could be toned down a bit if they are going to add these as well. But I do think this could be fine to have walkers buffed. But then they're also buffing the wood cost of everything, so it takes less wood to get it all the upgrades, and they're buffing headhunters back to where they used to be. And I think Orc looks pretty strong here overall. And then Human as well seems interesting. I guess Human's quite a bit stronger. They're the ones that definitely make out the most in here is Orc and Human. I think some of their buffs are still overtuned. So yeah, currently for Orc, honestly, they could still have most of these, but I think they should get rid of this line. This should just not exist. And then they could still have these. And this should still be lowered to like 130. But the others, well, they could maybe afford it. But like I said in my previous video, walkers were mostly used against elf quite a bit, I believe, these days, because there's a lot less mass tier 1. And now, if they did have all of these walker buffs, maybe they would still even use it against mass tier 1. And then walkers could be used against human now instead of shaman if they're good enough with this. So that's why I think this could be a good buff. But I do wonder, especially with all of the other buffs, I think this line should not exist, in my opinion. Now, previously they didn't have the headhunter buff, and I thought this would be toned down more. And it's like, okay, maybe the walker change is fine. But now they are having headhunters as well, and it's like, yeah, you know, maybe they don't need every single one of these. These are my thoughts. So Fire Lord. So for some reason, when they are deciding things they want to buff, they seem to do like 3 different buffs to it. You know, they got the 3 walker buffs, they got like the 3 necro buffs, they got the triple bash buff now. I think it's kind of weird to do that many buffs at the same time on like a single hero or unit. Yeah, looking at this, I don't particularly like this one. I don't know. I think this is pretty huge, especially for tower rushes, in which case I don't like this. Like, if they are going to reduce the requirement for lava split, maybe they should have done it differently. Maybe it shouldn't have gone from 12 to 9 and just like 12 to 11 or something. I don't know. Because that's 3 extra hits is quite a lot, actually. Is this the last patch? I don't know. Firelord volcano damage. So this is another instance similar to Bladestorm, where they are buffing a ultimate ability that affects buildings. And like I said with Bladestorm, I don't think it needs to be buffed this much. Like, if you're going to have an ultimate ability that can wipe buildings, it doesn't really need to have this huge damage. You know, I don't know. Because it also is used against units too, right? I do wonder if maybe some of these abilities should be changed so that they only affect units, and then maybe the damage numbers are fine. They can be ultimates that are used in battle where you run the risk of getting stunned and the ultimate stopping its channeling, so it just stops, right? But like, I don't like when these abilities get buffs to where they can just wipe buildings, because I've seen instances of like Lawlight playing Firelord, getting at level 6, and using the old volcano that only did 100 to just wipe all of the food buildings of his opponent. He would just use it on a bunch of Ziggurats or Moonwells or whatever the opponent had. And it's like, it just killed it. Like, the volcano lasts long enough where if it's channeling long enough, you're just gonna wipe all of their food production. And now it does it even faster, 50% more damage. So I don't particularly like these. Yeah. And then the incinerate change. Honestly, incinerate's kind of bad. So this is probably good. It doesn't really affect instant Firelord tower pushes either, because you have plenty of mana for those anyways. So it's mostly like late game Incinerate. So I think this is good. Because Incinerate's still kind of mediocre anyways, just numbers wise, I believe. So this is fine to have the mana cost reduced. And Incinerate still at the same level it is before. But I do wonder if the Lava Split is too much of a buff. That being said, Firelord's generally considered one of the worst heroes, so maybe this is the right type of buff. I feel like I would have, instead of having the hit requirement for Lava Spawn splits, I would have preferred the mana cost be reduced or something like that. But maybe this is actually fine. I do, like I said before, I do wonder if it's necessary to have all of the buffs though. And I'm still worried about building damage from skills like Volcano and Bladestorm being too strong. And then I think the rest of the changes. Oh, they changed Crystal Ball as well, right? Now it's at level 2. That's so weird. So now Crystal Ball competes with Circlet, Claws, Gloves, and Ring 4? Crystal Ball is just a hard thing to balance because I think it's actually pretty useful in a lot of situations. It's just it's also useful to like use it once or twice and then sell it. Right? Because it's something that you can use and then still sell. I wonder if Crystal Ball should instead be a consumable. Maybe it should be like level 2 item, but it should have like, you know, 4 or 5 charges or something instead of like permanent uses over time. I don't know. It's a weird item to balance, I guess. I'm not really sure what the right call is. Yeah, like maybe it could be in the Wand of Illusion and Ward's drop pool. And it could have like quite a few uses. I think that would be pretty useful if it had like 5 uses or something. If people would actually use it instead of selling it, especially if it doesn't sell for that much. Like if it's selling for like what do wards and stuff sell for? Like 75 gold or something? If Crystal Ball only sold for like 75 gold, but you could instead use it 5 times for 5 reveals, people would actually use Crystal Ball as a consumable. Then you have to decide, how do you balance it? Do you lower it to 4 or whatever? I don't know. But yeah, I think having it be a consumable in like the ward camp, the ward Wand of Illusion replenishment potion camp, I think that would actually be better than this stuff. But yeah. That being said, at level 2, people will be less inclined to sell it now because it doesn't sell for a whole lot. And it'll have a lot of value here. So people will actually use it quite a bit, I think. Because now, if you're selling it for only 90, you can get a lot more value in many situations to just keep holding on to it and continually scanning. And you'll see, because it's at such a low drop table, it'll also become more common, which means you'll see it more often on both sides and people will just constantly be scanning. So I don't know if I like this, but it will make the crystal ball have use, I guess. People will use it quite a lot. Staff of Teleportation now has 2 charges. Probably pretty good to do. And then we got some neutral changes. Movement speed reduced on the Ice Trolls and Dark Troll Trapper. I don't know what Dark Troll Trapper is. I feel like that doesn't affect solo. Because this is obviously a trapper with ensnare, right? And you don't really have ensnare trappers in solo. I don't think this matters for solo, as far as I know, but maybe I'm wrong. And then the others, I don't think this is needed here. Maybe the Berserker? I don't know what the other trolls have, the non-ice ones. Like, what are their numbers comparative to each other? But I know the Ice Troll Priest doesn't have Abolish, for instance. So if move speed is its advantage compared to the one that has Abolish, it should keep its move speed, right? I'm not sure what the Berserker has differing from the non-Ice Troll Berserker. This is just normal Troll Berserker. I don't know if this one's needed. I don't know the Dark Troll Trapper even is from, if it's like a twos map thing or something, I don't know. Then the Assassin, this one's probably fine. Keeps the Assassin strong for its stats and poison ability, but makes it more vulnerable because it's slower moving. Overall, the current changes as they are, I would say Elf takes the biggest hit by far. Undead takes a small hit with Nerubian, but also gets a lot of buffs overall in other places. And then Human gets some weird and kind of crazy buffs for Mountain King and Paladin. So I don't know. I think the Human buffs still need to be toned down slightly for the heroes. Militia and keep and castle stuff could stay. Raised Dead should be gotten rid of still. Blaze-Storm should be lower. Maybe get rid of this Walker line. And these races would still all have overall buffs, right? And then Elf, the previous version they released, I thought the changes were fine-ish for Elf. I was like, okay, you know, apart from warden stuff, which was maybe a little bit too much of a buff, it was fine. But now warden's not really getting any meaningful buff. Like, people aren't going to play warden anyways in a lot of situations. And Elf mostly just gets 10 mana on the Druid of the Claw at the cost of Mana Flare, Immolation, and Talons. Just kind of weird. I don't know. I think, like I said, I think for Immolation, this needs to be back down to 5, which it was previously at, instead of 10. Especially if they're going to lower the damage as well. But maybe 10 is still usable. It's at the point where it's questionable though, because Elf honestly already used a lot of Moonwells. Like, I already build an extra Moonwell before teching and have 3 Moonwells. And my Moonwells are generally empty with my DH at 80% health and 50% mana. Empty Moonwells, 80% health, 50% mana. Before I've even engaged with the enemy sometimes, if I'm just creeping. So I guess the immolation change makes it a lot less reliable to creep fast, because you might prefer pulling and having evasion rather than outright creeping it with immolation. So you might just lose the speed because you can't afford all this mana cost. But yeah, I think 5 would probably be fine. And I think if they do have it to 5, then the damage changes fine as well. Like, you can afford this 0.5, whatever, easily. I don't know. I would say the biggest winners of this is Orc. Particularly because Orc can hit some good timing pushes with these cheaper upgrades, allowing them to get the other upgrades they need, and then faster timings if they have walkers and so on. Headhunters are buff now. They can hit a lot of earlier timings and just end games. I think Orc benefits the most. And then I would say Human benefits the second most because it's got some crazy changes with Devotion Aura. Devotion Aura is very powerful. If this change goes through, honestly, I think you'll see a lot of Paladin second type stuff. Because like 3 armor for level 1 Devotion is pretty powerful. So